the world's a stage, and you're being played. Hey there, I'm Jono Freeman, and thanks for tuning in to Lies of a Genius, a rebuttal to the fraudulent claims of BBC's latest docudrama, Shakespeare, Rise of a Genius. Indeed, this program is elevated beyond docudrama to a documentary. A documentary film is, according to the Oxford Dictionary, a non-fictional motion picture intended to document reality, primarily for instruction, education, or maintaining historical record. Of course, documentaries need to be entertaining as well, but it appears the first casualty here is that of truth. Now, we all love a good story, and filmic representations are all the more engaging if, as this series proclaims, they're true. But Rise of a Genius is not a true story. It's not even based on one. It's a steaming pile of lies, and someone has to take responsibility in calling out this truth claim. It all starts, well, the opening credits reveal 400 years ago, Shakespeare's plays were collected together in a book. Correct. It remains the greatest literary work ever created. Correct. Then it starts to get a bit slippery and ambiguous, with little is known about the man who wrote it. Now, this is true of the man from Stratford, but most certainly not true of the real author. It goes on. But there are clues. And this is when the documentary elements are completely disregarded in favour of pure invention and fantasy. In fact, 3 hours of it. Not bad, considering how little is known. How they can get away with this is because most of us are not properly aware of the world of the works and their creation. We're either ignorant, apathetic, or we just refuse to look into it. And so this Stratfordian version of Shakespeare has become gospel among historical and literary academics, and therefore among popular culture and opinion. We continue to be manipulated by convincing storytelling and production, and in this case, the clout of a long list of prestigious actors like Brian Cox, Martin Freeman, Judi Dench, again. But there is a need here to detangle the myth from the history, the evidence. So, shall we pull back the arras and reveal some theatrical truths? It's hard for many of us to do this because we've been heavily indoctrinated by our learning, but also because we love the figure of Shakespeare. The unlettered youth, a humble tradie, son of a shoemaker who wanders into London and spontaneously spews out the enormous canon of Shakespeare works. It's a kind of Christian ideal, the works conceived in the form of an immaculate conception, adding a sense of sacredness. Like Jesus, we know next to nothing about Shakespeare, leaving us with a void, easily filled with our own narratives and imagination. There's also always been an appeal in Shakespeare as a manager, actor, director, writer, who's running everything right there in the centre, in a theatre, easily accessible with everyone connected to him. This is not true, realistic, or plausible as a process for a playwright of this calibre. Rise of a Genius uses actors to promote Shakespeare as one of their own, giving Elizabethan performers supernatural powers as writers and editors, as with the folio currently being celebrated, even though, at the time, actors were the uneducated lowest of the low, not the influencers they are today. Yet, disturbingly, this program weaves in household names, some who are actually just talking about the plays and not commenting on the man, as an endorsement of the narrative, adding to the gravitas and truth of it all. We have the usual scenes of Will looking pensive while scribbling away his monumental creations. We have a particularly cosy family scene after Will's death with his daughter, Susanna, and other family members all gathered around the kitchen table looking through their illustrious relatives' manuscripts. Inserted into this family scene is the statement, "After his death, 36 of Shakespeare's plays were gathered together in a book," inferring quite explicitly that Stratford man's family had all his manuscripts and were instrumental in the publication of the first folio, 7 years after his death. Throughout the whole 3 fantastical episodes, we have the trustworthy narration of Shakespearean actor Juliet Stevenson, who guides us soothingly through all the scenes of Shakespeare's life, effortlessly shoehorning scenes from the plays into his life. Here's the problem. We have these amazing plays and their miraculous creation, but suspiciously little on where it all comes from. We have this visionary figure of a master, which ironically highlights a massive gap between the unparalleled content of the works and what little we know about the man. Having assumed William Shakespeare wrote the works, the orthodox infer against all evidence that the actor was the kind of man the plays themselves show the author must have been. But the inference is necessitated only by the assumption. This is also coupled with an attempt to find a suitably admirable human in the scraps of Shakespeare's story, which are both unflattering and point in the complete opposite direction to an author for these works, so that even the likes of Sigmund Freud and Mark Twain concluded there was an issue. As with the films Shakespeare in Love and All Is True, along with the series Will, it's the same shape we find here. The same heroic figure, the same clever use of references and text, twisted and distorted to create a lovable and marketable figure. Rather than show the reality of a country bumpkin with a strong Warwickshire accent, we always have a strapping, well-spoken poet with intense, brooding eyes, a nerdy outsider who, unlike all those around him, is focused and driven because he has a family back home. Aww. This Shakespeare represents a more common, compared to the aristocracy, and love-filled world. And again, we even get attempts to humanize and legitimize evidence like leaving his second best bed to his wife in his will. Treatments depict fresh inspiration all around him, taking him quickly into a room to write the next scene. As an actor, surrounded by other actors, always dynamic and raucous characters, all he needs is the theatre, the tavern, and his imagination to create the works. It'd be funny if it wasn't so serious. At least the comic film Bill embraced the stupidity for what it really is. But much of this fiction is still blessed as good as factual by the Stratfordians, which in turn is good enough for most of us. Before we acknowledge the real truth about the man from Stratford, let's take a short meditative session to reset and clear the slate that's been shoved in our faces for so long. Take a deep breath in, and let's begin with a doubt that Stratford-upon-Avon's William Shakespeare was not the author Shakespeare. First and foremost, let's separate the works from the man. Then let's separate the playwright Shakespeare, represented by this braid, from the historical man from Stratford, represented by this droopy moustache. Although there are several different spellings for Shakespeare, interestingly, the man never once, even in his will, spelled his own name Shakespeare, as we do today. As I showed in my previous video, if one looks close enough at the evidence, it's clear there were two Shakespeares. Presenting a list of details in the history of Guillermo's Shakespeare, which are fact, verified, established, undisputed.
1564, April. I was born.
Of parents who could not read, could not write, could not sign their name. Shakespeare's children were also illiterate, so a short history of literacy in his family would be illiterate, 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 world's greatest writer, illiterate. Stratford was at this time a small backwater settlement, shabby, unclean, and densely illiterate. Of even the most important men responsible for the government of the town, the majority had to make their mark, or an X, when attesting important documents because they could not write their name. Not being a snob, this is just history. Even the great orthodox Shakespearean scholar James Halliwell Phillips admits all this. Of the first 18 years of Shakespeare's life, nothing is known. They are a blank. Then
1582, 27th of November. A busy couple of days.
when he took out a license to marry Anne Watterley. But the next day, William Shakespeare, Shax, took out a license to marry Anne Hathaway. So that's 2 wives, 2 days, 2 Annes. Woo! Now, he married Anne Hathaway, and perhaps explaining his choice between the 2 Annes, within 6 months, their first child was born. About 2 blank years followed, during which period nothing at all happened to Shakespeare. Then,
1585, February, my twins came.
2 more blank years follow. Then,
1587, 23-year-old me departs for London,
leaving the wife and kids behind. Now, what kind of education was Shax equipped with when he left shitty Strats? His attending the local grammar school is actually an unproven assumption, as there are no records of his attending any school, university or private tuition, with these deficiencies being glibly explained by the word genius. But genius and knowledge, learning, are 2 distinct things, and the author of the plays had both. Incidentally, the only book that is actually recorded to have been available at the Stratford Grammar School was Cooper's Dictionary, kept on a chain. 5 blank years follow. During this period, nothing happened to Shakespeare. Then,
1592, I'm mentioned as an actor.
as I said, it's been very important to us that Shakespeare was an actor. Part of the appeal. Historically, however, Shax wasn't at all.
Ah, yes. Next year, 1593, my name appears on the official list of players.
Player at this time didn't necessarily mean performer. It signified a member or sharer of the company in some capacity. Shax was one of 8 sharers in the Lord Chamberlain's men. His name, liberally and variously spelt, becomes associated with a great number of plays. As a company member and broker of the plays, a middleman, Shax bought the rights, therefore owning them. W. Shakespeare, to indicate they were his and his company's property. Some of these plays existed before Shax had apparently written them, and many were written years after his death.
Oops!
There are no surviving plays, poems, diaries, or even any letters in Shax of Stratford's own hand. Unlike all his contemporaries, he has no paper trail. That is, anything that associates him with writing. Whatsoever! Nobody within his direct acquaintance referred to him as a poet or playwright. There is no personal contemporaneous evidence for him being an author. In his lifetime, he never claimed to have written anything. Not a play, not a poem, not a single line. Nor is there any evidence he was ever paid for writing. Neither did any of his descendants make a claim to the plays. When the name appears on the plays for the first time, it does, however, coincide with Shakespeare buying a big new house back in shitty Stratford and being made into a gentleman by letters patent, which also came with a flashy new family crest. Bonus! Around this time in
1598. I disappeared from London. See ya.
This after the printing and performing of the seditious Richard II. The Shakespeare name had never appeared on any play in print until the actor left town, though the plays continued to be written, acted and printed. He remained in Stratford, only very occasionally visiting London and busying himself in selling corn and malt, hoarding grain, trading in land and houses, lending small sums of money and brokering loans as a middleman, acting as a marriage broker, shirking a debt of 41 shillings, borrowed by his wife during the long desertion of his family, suing debtors for shillings and coppers, being sued himself for shillings and coppers. Finally, in
1616. I dictated me will.
not a scrap of manuscript of any kind is mentioned. He didn't even own a single solitary book. In childlike scrawl, he signs each page with a different signature and promptly dies. It's a bit sus, no? That gentle Shakespeare of Stratford died from the effects of a drunken bout on his birthday, the 23rd of April, with Ben Jonson, who'd come up to Stratford to visit, strangely, as there's no proof they were friends. Also, that no one mourned the loss. No one. Those are the facts. Beyond the previous details, we know not a thing about Shakespeare. All the rest of his vast history, filling up millions of pages of popular biography, is surmised. It's all made up! What we have here is the rise of a genius myth. The cultural, social, political context of the time demanded the author use a pseudonym, Shakespeare. Though a nom de plume may invite investigation, as it doesn't protect a writer like a human front does, in the case of Shakespeare, with a name remarkably similar, it was a winning combination. Hey! The mask was adopted because stories can use illusion to reveal deeper truths. The myth has engineered appeal, a sacred message that suggests we all have a right to education and information. And this is its brilliance. Shakespeare could be us too, but it's only a story, a lie of its genius author. As I also showed in my previous video, Shakespeare was additionally a ludibrium, a joke or jest, which is still waiting for us to work it out. This is even visually represented in the Droeshout engraving, a ridiculous caricature of the Stratford man with an impossible doublet. The bigger the myth gets, the more a joke it becomes. This image was just sent out into space for the folio's birthday. The myth continues to skyrocket, it seems. BBC's Rise of a Genius is a cleverly constructed story, with a few facts thrown in that apply to the historical period and Shakespeare, the author, but not Shakespeare from Stratford. It is yet another piece of propaganda to keep the UK town of Stratford benefiting from a thriving tourist trade and to preserve this ideal adopted by the English-speaking world of academia of a literary icon for the ages. Those who question the myth are called heretics, kept at a distance, our evidence belittled and swept under the rug. We're also charged with being snobs because we can't buy into the classic rustic tale. But it's not snobbery to properly weigh and consider the evidence, rather than believing the stories that tradition has left us. To acknowledge historical context and the requirements of education, books, and time necessary for the creation of these works. In the third part of Rise of a Genius, there's quite a remarkable but accurate assessment delivered by Cox, how Shakespeare's greatness is he always tells the truth. Ah, the irony! Ain't it a shame how the millions of people that truly love Shakespeare and what he's given us are not following Shakespeare's lead and valuing truth above and beyond the illusion and fantasy that has given birth to this most enduring of myths. So don't have a shack attack. Find where the party's at. Francis Bacon, Posse 33.
Wanton riddles told.